audio a little bit so that this wonderful electronica music is not overwhelming us. And wow, it has been a little bit since I've been on stream. So, pleasure to be here, everyone. Really looking forward to today's conversation as we dig in a little bit deeper, obviously, on the agent landscape that we've been kind of identifying here. So I'll do a little bit of housekeeping here just to kind of start, and then we'll go from there. As you can hear, our music is back. Last week, Mr. Marcus Haug went ahead and took on some of the confab. Basically Business Central content, which was awesome. Thank you again, Marcus, for being able to do that. I actually had my son's field day. We call it a spam day, ironically, in the Chisago Lakes area. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch him play tug of war and just have kind of a closeout to his school year. So it was a really good time. So I'm glad to be back. I'm excited to kind of go through a little bit more, obviously, of what we're covering here today as well. So yeah, it's kind of interesting now that we've been able to set this up so that we've got multiple people that can now do streaming. We actually took all the resources, all the layout that you see here, and made it so that we could actually share that across multiple computers, which is really cool. So it's just been a really exciting time to see, obviously, some of that growth as we continue to dive a little bit deeper in confab here in the future. So with that, right now, we've got some technical things that we're still kind of working through. So the chat, you probably see test 1, 2, 3. If you're on chat, go ahead and introduce yourself, say hi. If you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, or on Twitch, feel free to say hi. Remember, Confab is a event that we do bi-weekly that really focuses on interacting with the community to teach you more about some of the capabilities inside of business systems and just to have a lot of fun. And Mr. Looks like Rob is a bot in here as well, adding test 4. Thank you for that. So we are good to go, and we know that we're getting that chat, which is awesome. And yeah, I guess the key thing here is that as we're going through it, just know that if you want free consulting, this is a really good place to get it, right? So with that, what are we going to be covering today? Well, today is going to be more towards, obviously, Copilot agents and how to build agents. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about the market as well as we go through this. We've obviously focused a lot of Copilot Studio, and just recently at Build, there was a lot of new updates that were communicated that are going to be substantially impactful for the remainder of 2025 and then into 2026. So obviously what we want to do is we want to start talking about that now, because if you are a customer that's watching this, or if you are an existing consultant at Stone Ridge, or you're just generally curious about how agents work, obviously this is going to be kind of important, especially if you're in the business system space. If we think about where we've come from in the last 2 years to now, it is absolutely amazing. It's amazing to hear about how large language models have become faster, less power consumptive, are able to basically do more reasoning, but we're still not perfectly there yet, right? There's been a massive amount of investment that has happened inside of this space. And candidly, I think this is where it's going to start taking off. We knew this about 2 years ago when we started seeing the capabilities. And now that the platform is becoming better, you're going to see more. And I just want to be really candid with this too, because I think, a lot of people that are interacting with these AI-based systems, I think their expectations are too high. And I think that that's something that you need to start considering as you go through really these conversations and how you enable your business to effectively use these tools. Because if you're coming at it thinking that it's going to solve these high-level problems that you have inside of the business, that's not what it's here to start with. It's start to do more of the entry-level, low-level type tasks to be able to then perform faster and better, and then longer term, as these reasoning models and as these large language models become cheaper, when they become less power intensive so that the compute resources that are needed don't take as much equipment to do that, because obviously that's going to be a focus of the industry, then we're going to see more capabilities that are added. But if you're waiting for that to happen, you're already too late. right? You need to be ahead of where we're at to be able to really manage that. And so today I want to go through that a little bit more in detail with you as we really navigate this. And as you have questions, feel free to ask them in chat. This has been my deep dive now for the last year and a half basically at Stone Ridge, and it's been just eye-opening in terms of what the capabilities are that I see really impacting business systems. And just to give a little bit of credentials with this, right? So I've been in the industry now for about 25 years. I started off, ironically, focusing on biology. I wanted to be a doctor, right? I think that's what everyone wants to be when they're a kid sometimes. Maybe not everyone, but I was a glutton for punishment. And what I did then is obviously transition more into the technology space because I always used to build servers, right? So in my 25 years, I have been a functional consultant. I've been a project manager. I've been a BA. I've owned my own business. I've been a developer. Basically, almost every single role that's inside of the business system space. So what I try to do is I try to come at it from the realism perspective with it on Confab. And the reason for that is because, once again, you can get the marketing hype from every company out there. You can go talk to a sales team and they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. But when it comes to making good decisions, you kind of need that reality or that consultative approach, right, as part of it. So that's what we focus on Confab here, is we try to demystify really these technologies and how we use them to really then drive some of that process. So with that, let's go ahead and share my screen and let's start talking through really the beginning here of this agentic revolution that Microsoft is going to be investing in wholeheartedly in 2025 and 2026. And it's something obviously that you're going to want to be on top of, especially if you're using the Microsoft technology stack. So I'm going to go ahead and flip my screen. We've got chat now that should be in the right corner here. I'll hide it every now and then when we're taking a look at things. If you want me to as well, tell me to move it out of the way. Feel free to do that. But what I have here is I've got some articles that I pulled up that I wanted to kind of start the conversation around, because these are articles that are current year and then also getting a little bit deeper, and they're from then sources that I would call reputable, or companies that look at business system capabilities and then evaluate it, right? So like McKinsey, for example, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for example. These are sources that I look at along with also the other side of it, because I think that the perspective of agents and what they're good at and what they're not good at is really important as well. If we're just saying agents are the best thing since sliced bread, well, that sliced bread's going to get pretty moldy pretty quickly, to be honest. So we want to make sure we have that realism related to it. Now, I also listen to a lot of different podcasts, right? So I remember the podcasts about, I forgot who it was exactly, but they were talking about how AI is not going to be groundbreaking or revolutionary for it. And I remember just thinking through that, it was actually even more towards the beginning of this year thinking, well, geez, they just don't understand how to use the tool yet to be able to get to the results that they want. And that, quite candidly, is the most common scenario that we're seeing with companies as they go through AI adoption. They basically try to use the tool to perform a task that it's not good at. It's like trying to build a house with just a hammer in a timeline that doesn't align to using a hammer, where you may need a pneumatic hammer, right? So you've got to think about really how you use that tool. Now, AI agents, the next frontier in automation, this is in Forbes article, for example, that really talks about what we call large language models, right, as we go through really that processing. And Copilot is a large language model where basically we take text and we put it into it, and then from there it identifies the patterns of that text and identifies basically what the most consistent or statistical probable result would be for what that query was that we put in, or that prompt as we go through it. So Copilot is designed around this large language model architecture. And one of the unique aspects that Copilot has compared to a lot of these other large language models, such as Claude from Anthropic or Gemini from Google, is the fact that it's natively integrated into the Microsoft stack. And from a business system perspective, this is extremely powerful. And I can't say that enough. Like, if you think about Gemini, for example, can Gemini do the same things that Copilot can do from a large language model architecture? Technically, yes. But the way that data is stored inside of your tenant or inside of the Microsoft environment is not accessible entirely then from external based large language models. You can probably get close to it by building out vector databases, for example, where you're storing all of this data and you're using Power Automate to basically populate that potentially, or maybe even some pro dev perspective with it. But it's not going to be the same transparency that happens then with a large language model involvement like Copilot. I'm not trying to sell you on it. I'm just trying to tell you the fact or the reality that's related to it, even with the MCP protocol, which we'll talk about a little bit more here as well as we go through our building of our Copilot. So agents, as you can see here, are becoming more advanced. They're adding, for example, chain of thought, where basically we could use reasoning or large action modules or LAMs that are kind of like overseers basically to a large language model that take a task and then break it out. And this is a really important concept as well. There is a lot of studies that are coming out even recently as well, like Apple just released one earlier this week that goes through and talks about how maybe the reasoning models aren't really reasoning per se, but I will say that to take a task and break it out, these particular models are becoming better and better at becoming accurate with what the accomplishment or the goal is of the task that you're trying to accomplish. But the thing I keep on telling everyone as we go through, for example, our flight school or our flight plan, is the fact that these large language models are like 6-year-olds. You need to provide the scaffolding, the thought, the logic behind it to make them very effective. Whether that's a developer that looks at it through the lens of automating a business system, or an end user that's using prompts to get more information basically from what they're interacting with. So these agents, when we look at, for example, even McKinsey here, one of the very interesting perspectives that I think you should start thinking about when it comes to multi-agent scenarios, especially in the Microsoft stack, is the fact that agents can be designed to be similar to how people work in a job. Okay, I pronounce it like that because it's kind of different when you start thinking about like how I demonstrate agents to businesses compared to what the industry even says. As an example, when I'm demonstrating Dynamics 365 Finance, a common requirement we have are going to be credit and collection inquiries that we have end users that need to interact with basically the business system to get that detail. And one of the things that I kind of thought through was, well, why do we force an end user to go into the application to do these tasks? So let's back up a little bit, because in my world, obviously, the best sliced bread, so to speak, is going to be logging into Dynamics 365 and then interacting with that business system, where we do training, we do all this stuff around basically interacting with the business system to then accomplish a business goal inside of an organization, whether that's inventory management, whether that's production-based management, you name it. You'll log into the system. And quite candidly, that's also where I hear the most frustration typically from end users when they interact with the business system. There's too many fields on the screen. It doesn't look organized. I don't like the layout, look, and feel of it, right? There's all these different statements that end users make that then we've incorporated like UI experience people that focus on making this little button a specific fashion, or putting all this information inside of one screen basically that identifies then all the critical requirements that are needed for an end user to make a decision. And this has been just kind of a fact of life inside of business systems, whether it's been in the old DOS days or the modern Windows days or now the cloud architecture days, right? Where basically end users want screens and information in a very pertinent way so that they can make decisions that are related to it. Well, one of the things that these agents allow us to do is to rethink then how an end user would typically interact with a business system. So as an example here, why do we make the end user go into the business system? How do I communicate to my team or to external vendors or to my customers when I need to have an action taken, whether even in life, like when you're communicating with your school, for example, with your kid to make sure that they're doing the right things for their progress reports? Well, typically I'm using email to do that. Or maybe I'm using Teams or some type of chat experience that's related to it to get that information quickly and effectively. And this is where, when I demonstrate, for example, inside of a business system, the change that's coming, basically, I don't now go into the business system. I send an email to an agent to do it. And how do I do that? Well, I created a couple agents. One of them, for example, is Cindy Ramirez. Cindy is a credit and collections agent that exists inside of our organization that I can send emails to inquire about aged balance details, about past due invoices, about generating collection letters that I can then forward basically to my customers to then automate those responses without ever going into the business system to do that. So this gets into these agent system interactions where we can now design managers or specific role type agents that you interact with inside of your business. And this is a massive shift. This is aligning as well to what Satya said, the CEO of Microsoft, about AI is the new UI. Instead of using the user experience or user interface of the business system, which is a graphical user interface, instead what we're doing is we're using email or the common tools that we interact with to basically then provide that information for us to make decisions off of it. And once you understand that concept, the automation potential is almost unlimited. And I know that there's consumption and I know there's cost related to it that you need to think about. But at the same point, remember, these costs are going to come down. If we look at, for example, the GPT-4 model compared to the 4 Omni, compared to the 4.1 model, the amount of power consumption that's needed to run these models has incrementally and almost exponentially decreased. So we don't need nuclear reactors as much now to run these large language models. So this is a very interesting concept that you need to be thinking about. And what I would say as well is that you need to be thinking about it from a job role perspective as opposed to basically an agent that covers everything. And you're right, Carly, AI is the new UI, right, as part of it. So this here, as you can see, shows kind of that layout where we're going to have agentic systems with different types of agents, where maybe even we've got a analyst, checker, and planner, right? Or by job role that would tackle that. What I typically do is I break it out by job role. I say, send me a resume, and that resume is what I want to create basically as I go through that process. So loan underwriting is an example of it. We've got some more here, code documentation and modernization. If you haven't heard about the Claude, like I look at Reddit and I go into the Claude thread from Anthropic, and they've got some really great tools for writing code. It is absolutely amazing how quickly developers are able to create projects and code using AI automation. Like if you're not a developer and you're not using any type of agentic or even just chat experience type generation for code, you're going to be obsolete really quickly because the code that can be created by AI is getting better and better and better every single day. So learning how to use that tool where you can then create multiple projects to speed up then the deployment and creation of things is going to be really critical for developers. And if you're not doing it, and if you're not supporting it, and you decide to go down the path of the graphic artists that we saw, you know exactly what happens there. It's already been proven. So you need to think about what you need to do to be able to become efficient at using these tools then. And don't forget that the human element is still there. It's still going to be something that you review that code and that it's not perfect and that you're going to have to make changes to it. But you need to be able to start doing that. And just case in point, just even documenting your code, adding that one additional layer then before you check in code, for example, inside of GitHub or even inside of Visual Studio, right? Or DevOps, right? You can use these tools then to document that so at least there's a narrative related to what that method, what that function, or what that capability is that you're adding to basically then communicate better with external parties. And it's almost a zero cost add that you do to be able to tackle that. So these agents are really, as you can see here, about reinventing the way that we work. And once again, it's not perfect, but it's getting better and better every day. So how does Microsoft then incorporate that into what we're going to be tackling? And I will say this just candidly, and so everyone hears it first from Stone Ridge. You may have heard it in other areas as well. There's not a doubt in my mind that for 2025 and 2026, Microsoft is going to release as many automated agents as they can. Why is that? Because automated agents are a very good use case for large language model interaction. What do I mean by that? Well, part of our flight plan and even the flight lab that we've been doing, where basically it's a marketing vehicle that Bree and Britt and our team has basically created that you can subscribe to and have a 45-minute kind of where are we at inside of the AI states, for example, focuses on the fact that large language models are really good at some things and really bad at other things. An example, if you want a large language model to take a large set of data and do analysis on it, it's not very good. I think you've heard it on Confab here a couple times too. Large language models can only accurately determine patterns in around 32,000 to 64,000 characters of data. And in token size, we call that usually like 8,000 tokens or 16,000 tokens. Basically, one token equals 4 characters, just high level math as a part of it. As you increase token size, which I find very interesting that OpenAI and these other companies are like, oh yeah, we can support 1,000,000 tokens. Well, you can support, for example, uploading the entire Book of War and Peace with the new GPT 4.1 model, but you can only be 60% accurate in the inquiries that you do against that. So from a business system space, if you think about it, that's not a good use case. Because if you're saying, all right, great, well, I've got these records that have what are called high entropy. High entropy means that every record has a set of randomness around it. Well, business system data, every record is different, almost always, right? There are some grouping, but numbers for financials, for example, are typically never the same. And especially when you have a date attached to that account number along with that amount, it's very rare that the meaning of those is going to be the same, so we call that high entropy. And so large language models, if I send it, great, I can send it 1,000,000 rows now, but it's only 60% accurate, that's not going to be a good use case from a business system perspective. But an automated agent is, because an automated agent typically takes maybe an email, and an email that's more than 65,000 characters, they exist, I make them all the time, but most of the time when interacting then with them, we don't have to worry about that as much, right? So that's a really key concept here, that AI agents are going to be something that have basically the ability to do these tasks, but you really need to make sure you understand what those tasks are. And here's the other thing that we need to remember. I don't know if any of you remember this, but I remember that all of a sudden in 2010, nearly $1 trillion evaporated from the stock market. Do you remember that? There was a bunch of things that occurred where all of a sudden the stock market shut down, and I'm really curious how many of you on chat actually remember this. This was something I didn't even think about until just recently, where basically the broker systems that were out there had the ability to automate trades. And what all of a sudden happened was that there was this huge sell-off that occurred for all of these trades based upon algorithms that weren't AI-centric algorithms at that point. They were getting closer and closer, but those algorithms caused a huge problem on the stock market back in the day. Now, the question that we have with these agents is how do we define structure around them to make sure then from a business system perspective, we're not replicating the sins of the past here, right? And so what I recommend obviously with this is when you're doing your design around these autonomous agents, don't forget the human element with it. It's really critical to have these checks and balances in place. Build basically a process inside of your organization or a policy regarding how AI systems are actually going to do that when they go through that as part of it. Looks like Carly's got some. Scott, I was playing with Polly Pockets and Barbies in 2010. Well, yeah, good for you, Carly. I was not. I was actually in the business system space. I graduated in '99, so that I was not playing with any of that type of stuff. That's awesome. So I guess key thing here though is just remember that when we look at what we're going to be doing then for AI agents, make sure that you use it for that 80/20 type concept where 80% is about the automation, but 20% of that decision making is really critical that humans are involved with, and you need to be able to structure that. So, how can we build an agent then to kind of incorporate these concepts and to start breaking out how agents interact basically with our environment? Well, let's go into Copilot Studio and let's talk about that some more. So, inside of Copilot Studio, there's been some major features that have been introduced recently that allow for us to go through and then, for example, create new agents and even do what we call handoffs of these agents. And this is a really important concept. What do I mean by a handoff? Well, agent wise, when we first had Copilot Studio come out, agents were very thick. Basically, you would build an agent and you would have all these different topics that you'd want that agent to tackle. Well, the problem with that is that agents, the more knowledge you add to it, the harder it is for that agent to reply because the domain experience or the expertise requirement of it becomes so broad for that agent. Think about it this way: jack of all trades, master of none, right? So when you start asking questions that go deeper, then all of a sudden you get frustrated because it doesn't have that ability or that knowledge that's related to it. So instead, there has to be a way to basically hand off information between different agents in order to make that more effective, just like we do as people. We do it through email, as you can imagine. And with email, that's where we communicate with all these different types of conversations. Well, we could do that with our agents as well. In fact, before the new technology I'm going to talk about came out, we would build emails that would then hand off the information, or we'd use Dataverse tables where we would have, for example, a shared Dataverse table that would state the agent that we're communicating with and then the content of that inside of some type of multi-line text, for example. So that way we could communicate between agents and have events then that would occur as we go through that process. And then we could use a Power Automate to filter and screen those to then hand it off to the right agent as we went through that process. It's still a very valid approach, but there's a newer technology that's been talked about for 2025 and 2026 that's really going to become the backbone of that. And that's the technology that we call the Model Context Protocol. You'll hear it referenced as MCP for short. MCP is a definition of how large language models can communicate with each other. And it allows for a couple of things. It allows for an agent to understand data when it connects to a different system, such as Fabric or potentially Claude or OpenAI, for example. When you have an agent that you build then inside of the Copilot stack, it can then communicate obviously with those external sources, and it will understand what it can do with those external sources as well. Could you replicate that through custom plugins and Power Automate? Absolutely, you could. But the MCP protocol is a standard that all large language models will support in the future. You can imagine it as the USB of large language models, where it's going to be that universal communication methodology that we can use. Now, there's some good and bad with this, and I'm just going to be right to the point. On the Microsoft side of it, it's not the best in some ways because now all of a sudden these agents that Claude for Anthropic, for example, or OpenAI or Gemini could create that could cannibalize from the Microsoft stack, right? Um, and I just want to say it because that it goes both ways. But there's a huge benefit to it as well. And the benefit is the fact that you, as a customer, can align then to the right technology stack to address the needs that you have inside of your business for automation. Because quite candidly, different large language models do better jobs based upon what they're trained off of. And that's the real prize here for all these companies that are building these large language models. the more accurate they can train those models to attack or basically address a specific task, the better output that will be there and the better it will be for you as a consumer, obviously. So this vendor lock-in goes away, but I can guarantee they'll probably figure out a way to do consumption around it, right? So you need to be thinking about that from a business leader perspective. Now, there are still some substantial advantages then obviously to the Microsoft Copilot. So don't think that all of a sudden now, oh, that means Copilot's not going to be the good technology to use. Well, Copilot still has the semantic index. Semantic index is a vector database that takes all of your emails and all of your chats and all the data that's in your Microsoft 365 tenant and basically creates vectors off of it. And vectors are critical for large language models to identify details and data that's related to it. I can just really quickly summarize how it even works inside of Copilot Studio. So as an example, I'm going to go ahead and open up this handbook helper that I did for our Flight Lab series just recently. And of course, I've been vamping too long. Let's go ahead and re-log in with my Stone Ridge creds so we can actually have that. And what we're going to do just really quickly here is then show really that agent that we created. And what I'm going to do just temporarily is I'm going to take this alert bar, or the Restream chat, and hide it so that way you guys can see everything, and we'll wait for this to kind of log in. And one of the things that's really kind of interesting is the fact that when we talk about knowledge that we can add to Copilot Studio, so if I click on my knowledge as an example here, I can add, for example, all these different types of data sources then into the knowledge that this Copilot can access. Now here's the interesting thing about it. Number one, I can upload directly to the agent, which means then that I have a repository or a data source that's really close then to that agent, which is typically going to be the fastest interaction with that agent. But what I can also do is I can add Dataverse or SQL or Salesforce or Dynamics 365, right? Or SharePoint in here as these different types of knowledge sources. And what's interesting about this is that knowledge sources, when it comes to Copilot, are then used in what we call vectors. A vector is basically a mathematical representation of a prompt or of data. An example would be if I ask for the electrical charges of all different types of standards in the US, well, what it's going to do is it's going to assign that prompt a number, and it's going to take that number and then search a database of all these other vectors, and from there it'll find the top 10 ones that relate to that prompt based upon association, and then from there it provides that response back to us. It's an overly simplified way of explaining it, but it's basically a mathematical representation of data, and the closer that that prompt is to the data, the more accurate it is for that response. So that means, for example, when I upload this file, our handbook and our policies that are related to it, what it does is it takes that file and it breaks it out to these multiple thousands of different chunks of data. We call those token packs. So we'll have a tokens of 512 tokens or 1024 tokens. Microsoft manages that in the background. And then from there, those tokens are assigned a vector, and that vector then can be referenced. So that way, if I ask about our charitable contribution policy at Stone Ridge Software, that's going to have a mathematical representation from inside of this document. And when I create the prompt saying, look for my charitable contributions, it's going to have a vector number that's very close then to that section that's inside of this document. Once you understand that, it probably makes a little bit more sense why large documents sometimes don't give you very accurate details. So being able to design your agents to be small and then to use topics to path that information for what knowledge an agent should be referencing is really, really critical when you go through that process. So part of this then from a knowledge perspective is making sure that you're building your agents then to support that. So an example might be maybe you've got a vision helper or a dental helper or a medical helper. Those are three separate agents I would recommend because the domain experience or expertise between them obviously is going to be hyper-focused on each of those areas. And you don't want to then have it where you've got an HR agent that accesses all three because there may be content in vision that is misinterpreted for dental depending upon the knowledge sources that you've added, right? Because once again, charges, for example, Charges could be electrical, it could mean a business central charge, it could mean a charge in finance and operations. So building one massive agent for support, for example, could give us a lot of hallucinations, right, for the responses that are provided back. And this is an important concept. So how do we get around this then? Because in the past, the problem with this has been, well, what happens if I want to have one agent up front where I can ask these questions, and then from there, I make these small little agents, but when I publish an agent, for example, in a channel here, it's that one agent that only is accessible for it. Well, what we do now is we use topic pathing in tools to tackle that. So what I mean by that at Microsoft Build is that this model context protocol allows us now to basically reference different types of agents that we set up and configure that then use the model context protocol to interact with them. And those are called tools inside of here to be able to complete specific tasks and improve engagement then related to it. So just as an example here, for this particular agent, let's say that we had data from a handbook helper perspective that we wanted to publish on Fabric. And in Fabric, we had a Power BI report or an artifact that had that detail because we set up basically a Copilot enabled workspace using Fabric capacity as an example to basically then take data and then provide summation off of it and then provide narratives on the different changes that may have happened inside of that data. Well, what I can do is I can click on this add tool, and you can see here we've got this new option called the model context protocol that we can use to access that. So if I click on the model context protocol, you can see that this allows me then to add, for example, different types of what we call servers that are the gateways to these models that may be interacted with. And here's the really groundbreaking thing about it. You are going to be able to eventually add, for example, different agents that then pass the chat history to that agent so that the answers that come back then are very specific to that domain experience. So you can have a front-end HR agent that then asks questions to your vision, dental, or to your medical sub-agents. And what you do is you design the topic pathing around really those agent experiences and the criteria that they need to do, and then you localize all of that knowledge then in these helper agents to then interact with it. And this, once again, becomes a very powerful tool for automating, for breaking these different agents out, and then aligning it for different tasks then that they can perform as well. So not only then can you use this to centralize knowledge inside of an agent, but you can use it then from a chat experience and then an automated agent as well. And so if you think about this just a little bit more, the explosion in the number of agents that you can provide just becomes kind of substantial. And I know you're going to think about it at first, you can be like, well, wait, Scott, this means then that I've got to worry about all these different agents that I have to set up as part of it. Well, what you're building is a modular, basically a modular framework where you can then start almost like we use inside of the programming landscape of model view model, right? Or MVVM or MVM or whatever you want to call your architecture, where at the lowest level you've got your knowledge repository agents, and then from there you determine whether or not you want to use an automated agent or a chat experience agent, and you don't have to worry about mixing them together, because sometimes those chat experience and automated agents, at least from my experience, it becomes very hard to disassociate. Is this actually an automated event that's happening, or is this something that an end user is experiencing or chatting with? And I may even want different visualization or different reactivity depending upon whether it's automated or not. But here's the cool thing about it. You could still package it up in the HR solution. So remember, part of this for these tools that we add when we go into our settings as well for this is that when we build agents and we go to our advanced, we define what solution this agent is a part of. So that way we can package up these agents to then be the HR AI solution for your organization, but then it has all those main components that are related to it. And here's the other cool thing about it. If your vision agent then needs to get to an external data source that's different than, for example, your medical, you can isolate that connection information inside of these sub-agents as a part of it. So just to provide you a very, very deep ability to go through and then enhance and add, for example, more capabilities inside of here from an agent perspective really easily. So let's go through and let's create one just really quickly. And it's really easy to do, right? So let's say we've got a business issue where we want to do some type of automated AP processing, because quite candidly, this is a really common scenario inside of a business where when an email comes into an inbox, well, I want it to basically go through and then image it and then add a record potentially to something as part of that process. Well, it used to be creating something like that would take forever to do. But we can do this on stream in just a couple minutes, at least the scaffolding of it, to show you how easy this is to go through that process. So let's go ahead and do that. Just go open up chat really quickly here. Looks like we've got some viewer, developer Barbie. Yep, you got it, Leah. Let's go ahead and take this, and I'm going to do a new create for it. Let's create a new agent. And let's call this agent, for example, what would I like to make here? I'd like to make an agent that will monitor an email inbox for sales invoices that are received from our vendors, and then create automated AP images as part of that process, right? Or automated AP entries, automated purchase invoices as part of that process, right? I'll get my mug out of the way so you guys can see this as we're going through and doing it. If I can find where my cam is, speaker one, disappear. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Click on that. There we go. So it's going to get a name that's related to it as we go through this. Great, so it's going to monitor for sales invoices. It's automatically going to create purchase invoices based upon it. Invoice monitor. Let's name it our automated AP agent. Okay, so we'll get the name here. So it's our automated AP agent, right? First, could you provide more details? For example, well, we'll do this right here. Monitor email inboxes and create this, right? We'll keep it simple to start here. Now, mind you, when you go through this process, you could add a lot more with it. And here's another thing that you can do as well. You can actually open up the Microsoft 365 chat experience if you want to, and then basically ask, well, what should I put here for a prompt to be able to tackle this? So I want to ensure accuracy with invoice details. I want you to make sure that you are truthful and honest with all interactions with this agent. So we're going to even make it do that as well. So there's a lot of concepts here that I add that you're probably like, well, why is that? Well, truthful and honest, it increases accuracy in a large language model. Imagine it like you give your 6-year-old some context priming, as we call it, where you tell what that 6-year-old should be doing as the action. Well, typically then they follow that, hopefully, as much as possible, right? But it at least makes it front and center, even in a large language model as well. Do we want to be publicly accessible? No, not yet. We don't need that right now. Now, we could add that if we wanted to as well, but we don't need to for this example. Do you want to make any modifications? Nope, we're good. Let's go ahead and see if it'll allow me to create it. And we will create this automated AP agent on stream here just to kind of start. All right, let's go ahead and create. One thing that we could do is we could click on the skip to configure. We could add additional suggestions. We could add additional prompts that are inside of here. We could add knowledge right for it. So we have the ability to do some updates with it. We could even add an icon if we wanted to. I'm going to skip all that, and we're just going to go ahead and basically then create this agent. Now, in this agent, we're going to go ahead and hook it up so that it only fires off when we have a specific trigger that occurs. And I'm going to point it to my inbox to start. What I would recommend, quite candidly, is I set up domain users. And in those domain users, I set them up as an agent so I can apply a group policy, security policy, and all that kind of stuff from an Active Directory or Entra perspective. But it allows me basically then to hone the inbox that would be used as well with it. You could use shared inboxes if you want to, but once again, I always like the user account theory around it, even though it might consume a license for it. So it's just easier to manage, easier to secure, in my opinion, and all these other facts, but you can use it as you see fit, right? So in knowledge-wise here, now that we have this agent, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the settings that are related to this agent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable it for search results, as we can see here. And I also am going to make sure the image uploads is checkmarked, right? Because this is going to be another example where we're going to want to then have images that are provided from PDFs possibly. Now, one other thing that we can do as well is we could actually enable the deep reasoning models. Now, once again, this increases your consumption, so that's why it's something just to consider. And candidly, sometimes these deep reasoning models aren't as accurate as you would think they should be. So really, I test it without using deep reasoning models to start here. So as you can see, all the setup is pretty much done here as well. Content moderation, I'm going to put it at medium just to kind of start here. And basically, that's all I need to change to be able to go through and then create the initial agent experience here. So those changes were saved. We'll close it out and we'll go back into the agent now to go through this. Now for this to run, what we need to do is we need to basically have a trigger that's related to it, right? So as an example, when do I want this agent to happen? Well, I want it to happen when I have a specific trigger that's related to it. And so I'd add a trigger inside of here, and when a new email arrives, look at that. It's actually one of those triggers that's already here, right? So I can say, all right, fantastic. When a new email arrives, that's when I want this agent to actually do something with it. And here's the really cool thing about it. So I'm going to say this is going to be our vendor invoice inbox is what our trigger name is going to be. And we can see that it connects to Copilot Studio here and then also to Outlook Office 365. I'm going to click next inside of here, and as you can see here, this kind of looks like an interface that I'm used to. Power Automate, right? So if you're used to making flows, well, you would see this. So I'll say it's my inbox, for example. I could do attachments, like do I want to include attachments? Yes, I do. Do I want to specify a specific importance that's related to it? Do I only want ones with attachments? And actually, that would be a yes as well, right? So this allows me to go through and then define what would happen when that particular email arrives. I could go ahead and create that trigger, and now this agent is connected to an inbox where when emails come inbound, it's going to consider those as part of that processing. Now, obviously, once again, you're going to want to test this. You're going to want to make sure that you've got the right inbox set up, that you've got the right content that's there, that you've got the right communication then with your particular vendor for that. But what we'll see here from an agent perspective is that we now have that trigger that's related to it. Now here's another thing that you can do as well. Look at this. Edit and Power Automate. So remember, part of these triggers, what's really powerful about it is the fact that it's reusing the existing architecture of the Microsoft stack. So once again, as an example, if you don't want the agent to reply in a certain condition, remember, you can go into Power Automate here and basically add almost anything inside of here, right? So this is a concept that I use then to even connect Business Central to these agents, where, for example, when a particular Power Automate or event happens inside of Business Central as a trigger, and I'll just show you just really quickly here, there is some finessing that you have to do to be able to do this. I'm going to delete this just really quickly, and we're not going to save it. But an example would be, what stops you from not using Business Central inside of here so that, for example, when a particular event or when a record is modified or a record is deleted, that we do something with it, right? So this is a very interesting concept where if you want to override really what is here for those different triggers, you can do that. And I have done that for business system demonstrations to show those capabilities as part of that. So just note you do have the ability to basically override that or to add additional steps. Maybe when an email comes in, you want to have some type of evaluative effect that happens with it. Maybe, for example, you want to have a comparison with it. So maybe you want to run a prompt that you create a custom AI prompt in this where you evaluate, for example, whether or not it is low inventory or that is this really a invoice that we need to process, right? So you can have it then from there do pathing inside of here to basically go through that processing. So there's just a lot of options then that you have to expand then on this to make it even better. I'm not going to do any of that right now. Let's go ahead and leave this. We'll go back to it. I just want to click on it really quickly to make sure it did not save because it shouldn't. And we'll see here that it won't have that as part of it. There we go. Perfect. We've got that. So the next thing that we can do after we've added that particular trigger is that we can actually go ahead and then add a topic that's related to this. So in the topic here, what I can do is I can create a new topic. And in that topic, I can say this topic is used to go through and evaluate the email and email that was received and then create records inside of Dataverse to go through and record the purchase sales invoice to purchase invoice in our system, right? So this is an example then of these topics that you can do. And remember, the agent evaluates what topic is used based upon this description. So what I could do here is I would say then that this is going to be process inbound sales invoice topic, right? And then from there, I can save that away. Once again, really powerful, right? Really capable. Now, let's say that we have another agent that we created instead of a Power Automate, for example, that we can also then use to evaluate this data, this detail. This is the model handoff that we've been talking about, right? The MCP protocol. Well, what I can do is I can add a node inside of here, and then from a tool perspective, what I can do is I can either connect, for example, to a flow or some of that additional detail, or if I have a tool that's created, if I click on the add tool, for example, I can use this as well then to connect, for example, to Teams to get more information. Or maybe I just do the tool to do an update related to it. So as an example, I could say Teams and I could say create a chat or list members or add a message, right? So this allows me then to interact basically with Teams then as a tool then inside of my topic. Instead of me creating a Power Automate to do it, this is a more native transition using the MCP-based capabilities to basically go through and get that information. So I could actually take this, for example, and I could reply with a message in a chat, and I could then say, for example, we'll let it connect just really quickly in the background here, that Microsoft Teams gets connected, and we'll add it and then configure it. And what I should be able to do then with this tool is then specify where the processing of this is going to occur. So this would be an example then of then communicating or the agent posting about an invoice that came in, and maybe you've got a shared AP invoice team, for example, that you want to monitor to basically then track all these different types of AP scenarios then that are coming in through this agent. So this just expands then upon those great capabilities. Instead of creating one-off Power Automates, for example, or flows, we can do that then using these tools inside of the system. Now, once again, preview, right? We're starting to see these new features come in. So I'm going to go ahead and just refresh this just really quickly in the background. And what I should see hopefully is that tool has been listed. So if we actually go ahead and pull it up just really quickly here again, the agent will reload. And there we have that tool. So description, Microsoft Teams, it's going to use my connection right here. And once again, I could create a new connection or change who I'm interacting with. I can post as a specific value. We'll just say that. And then what I can do here is do a custom value, and then we can select an option right for this. And then I could actually go ahead and then add, for example, I could either pass a variable that's related to it or not. I'll dynamically fill that in with AI as part of it, but you're able to go through and then customize these as part of that process, right? And so I may then say that I want this to post in, for example, our pre-sales sales team general chat, right? So that might be something that we use to be able to go through and then customize that posting that would be inside of there. And then from there, I've got that reply message request that would be inside of here, and I could then save that away. So this is just an example then of these different tools. But then in the topic, what I can then do, if we go back to that process inbound process here, I could then add that tool so that when that particular event occurs, that it's going to post that detail, and I can then reference, for example, the string, the link, and the conversation details that are inside of here as well. So once again, these tools are now plugins that allow us to basically go through and do that. Now that's just informing. What else would we have to do? Well, we would do something like this. We would take, for example, this, and we may then create a generative answer off of it, right? So as an example inside of here, we may actually take this and then drive that process as part of an answer or reply with it. Or what we may do is we may do a new flow, right? So instead of basically doing all the work inside of here, what we could do is we could actually take that agent flow, leave this, and we could say, for example, as we see here, when an agent calls the flow, I would like to have the email subject. I would like to have the email body, and I would like to have, for example, then the actual attachment, right? So those are the three that we're going to ask for. Then what I want to do is I want to take that and I want to run a prompt. In that prompt, we'll take a quick look at it just really quickly here. Let's take a look at the one I created here because I think this might be it. If I click on the edit just to pull this up, what I can do, hopefully, is define then the process that would be used then to generate basically that content. So I've got my subject, my body, and then my attachment. Basically take this document, and if it's a sales invoice, generate a JSON formatted response, output ensure it is like this layout for it. So I actually defined all of that for it. So look at that. I actually have the ability basically to take this data and then attach it. So that is the right prompt for it. So then I could reference the email body based upon the body, or the subject based upon the subject, or the invoice document based upon, obviously, the attachment that's here, right? So this is an example then of me creating that agent flow to generate that content, and when I respond to it, I can actually respond then to that agent with those details. So as you can see here, I can specify, for example, the JSON output, and then from there, save that away as part of this process. So now I've basically taken that particular file, processed it, and now if I go back into our agent, what I should be able to do is actually go through and then add, for example, that particular Power Automate flow. So if we go back into our advanced section here, or excuse me, our, where am I going here? There we go. Our section here, what I should be able to do is in a little bit here is it'll show up in terms of what that content is, and I'll be able to go through and then access it and then add it inside of here to go through that process. Now, as you can see, it's not here to start, right? So what's an easy way to do that? Let's go ahead and refresh it. I'll hit F5 to actually get that detail. Just know that as we're moving between these different technologies, that sometimes you may have to refresh that detail to get to it. So now, as you can see, I've got that trigger. If I go to the process invoice inbound for it, I didn't save it beforehand. We'll just take a quick look if we actually have, for example, that particular value. So we'll go to our tools inside of here, and what I should be able to do in a little bit is actually have that pop up, and obviously we're getting to time here, so it's not going to show up immediately here, but you would be able to basically reflect it, and I think it actually might be the entitled one because I did not rename it as part of that. So entitled here as part of it, I can add it, and we can see I've got my body that I could pass to it. So from here I can actually go through and then add that content inside of here. So once again, once you understand the tool, right, and how to go through this, you can get to a point where you can have basically these different types of actions that you want the agent to tackle. And from there, you can then have that insert into Business Central, or you can have it insert into Finance and Operations very easily and very quickly as you go through that process. So I know it's a lot to kind of take in to start, but I wanted to kind of leave it on that, obviously. Remember, these agents, and when we use Copilot Studio, allow for us to go really, really fast as we actually tackle some of these different types of processes. Now, is it perfect? No, it's not. Is it going to get better? Yes, it is. And that's the thing, is that right now, compared to where we were before, we couldn't even hand off these different types of content areas to different types of agents, but now we can. So learning how to use this is going to be important to be able to make the multiple agents that you're going to want to interact with then inside of your business system. All right. With that, thank you everyone for another wonderful Stone Ridge Confab. 2 weeks from now, we're going to have Mr. Marcus, I believe, doing some more content that he's going to be tackling. I will be out of the office on my daughter's dance tour that she's going to be doing. So that's going to be a lot of fun to watch her do her professional dancing. And then basically 2 weeks after that, I will be back to cover some more of these topics in detail. Once again, thank you again for all of your time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We really love to answer, obviously, all these different types of questions and capabilities. And I'll see you in about 4 weeks from now. Have a great rest of your day and talk to you later. Goodbye.
With